I'm David Fifield. I am the general manager of the Hunt franchise for Crytek.
David, we're celebrating the 5th year anniversary of Hunt Showdown. What's it been like? You've only been in the company a few years, but what's it been like seeing this game evolve into its 5th year anniversary?
Yeah, so I've been a fan of the game since the third anniversary, playing, very devoutly since Scrap Beak and that whole event came out. And then joined the company as the general manager of the franchise just this past July. So for me, I've had kind of both sides of the excitement of a player who fell in love with the game and put aside all other shooters to just focus on this one, and then living the dream of talking to the company and joining up to work on the thing I loved. And then, of course, leading up to this anniversary, we put a lot of effort into celebrating that with the Twitch Drops campaign and just looking back at all the things that it's done and all the things that the game has become.
Yeah, like talk about like you're doing Twitch drops. Can you go into detail about other things you're doing for the 5th anniversary? You guys are having a hell of a celebration over there.
Yeah, we had a whole game show. We had a bunch of the influencers who came on and were playing some trivia questions and doing some skilled shootouts in the trials modes and carrying on online that way so that they could win prizes to take back to their communities. We had just wrapped up the Devil's Moon event as well, which was kind of our biggest and best event that we had run so far. It ran for 60 days, had a big battle pass that was, tied into it to conclude right here leading into February with the anniversary. So lots of things, lots of content, lots of changes to the game, and just never a dull moment.
Your game is so unique in terms of the gaming space. There are asymmetrical games out there, but not quite as unique as yours. Like as a general manager of the franchises, what are some of the challenges when working in that space? Because it's so unique and working with the community and talking with the balance team and doing all these things to make the game as balanced and fun as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big thing is to just recognize there is some secret sauce to it and to make sure we don't upset that by trying to chase after bigger, better things that we think would be better, but that might make Hunt no longer be Hunt. So, where even the term extraction shooter, right, is a thing that's kind of emerging to describe these games where it's not quite a royale where the circle closes in and crushes you together. It's not a death match where clearly you're supposed to just run at each other and kill each other. It's a whole bunch of people who load into this environment. They have their own set agendas. They have some goals that they may want to follow, but they want to mix it. They can mix it up and play it their own way. You can also go in with all these different loadouts that aren't actually balanced against the other people in their loadouts. Like there's a thing to this game about embracing the parts that aren't fair. That sometimes somebody just has a much better weapon than you do because they came in having accumulated more hunt dollars or more playtime or whatever it was. But you're overcoming that fight with the weapons that you have at your disposal. And when you take someone down that had a notably better loadout, you can take their loadout and leave with it, or you can just take pride in the fact that you outplayed them. So that's just very different because a lot of shooters, like you were saying, they emphasize like, okay, when you hit go, each team should be perfectly balanced against the other team.
Right.
That's just not part of our formula at all. Our formula is there's a lot of crazy things that go on. And then, of course, we also, the soundscape and the audio, I think, is just something that Hunt does so well that sets it apart from so many other games in the shooter genres, like altogether, regardless of the play format. But that also gives away some of the sense of the danger you're in, because you can hear the rapport of some weapons and they're like, oh, that person brought a big gun, or that person bought an automatic gun, and those things are crazy expensive and dangerous, so I might have to change up my play style. Or you might be all about that because you brought a completely silent loadout, so you're going to skulk about and try to take it with stealth. So all those different things play into, there's not a lot of shooters or a lot of products on the market that give you that versatility and then throw it all into a melting pot of let's see what happens.
You guys have such a colorful cast of monsters and creatures that you fight in this game. Can you talk about like what goes into that process when you guys do release a new creature or a monster, and how, like, from development to actually implementing it into the game? Like, paint a picture for us.
Yeah. So, there's just so many possibilities of the monsters and the kind of things we could bring in for players to fight against and to populate the world. There's a lot of brainstorming that goes into it. We're pretty serious about this grim horror that's set in the 1890s. We want to embrace that kind of theme of the American South, though we're also considering some of the international aspects and the concept that things like what are going on there in Louisiana could be happening elsewhere in the world is a thing we touch on. We're bringing in these international hunters, and maybe there'll be some other mythos and lore things that we'll tie into as we go forward and grow over the next couple of years. For the monsters, we try to do things that feel Hunt and have our own identity and brand. So we try to not go into things that are just super tropey, like, okay, every horror game has this. It's like, okay, then maybe we don't need it if every horror game has it. And so we want it to be, distinctly Hunt, distinctly 19th century, distinctly, Western, Southern, occult, kind of creep factors to all those things. So all of that goes to, like, is it on brand? Do we feel it's identifiable? When you see that, do you know, like, oh, that came from Hunt? Or if you saw a screenshot from our game, would you mistake it as coming from another game? And our goal is when you see even just a screenshot, oh, that came from Hunt. So that's a big part of how we cut through all the possibilities.
Your game is so interesting. The world you've created in Hunt Showdown is such an interesting world with, the late 18th century, the very Western aesthetic. Have you guys been approached by Netflix or any other media to do like a transmedia thing, like a show or a film or anything like that? Because it would lend itself so well.
Yeah. We have some discussions that are going on. Nothing that we can publicly talk about. There's a short form video series that has been discussed and we had announced, but we're still waiting to hear about pre-production kicking off and that actually happening. So the discussions are out there. There's one we've talked about a little bit, but we're not sure what all the dates are around that one. And we are also very curious ourselves about where we should go with this as it gets bigger. And as, of course, you see more and more media wanting to tie into video games, especially video games with a distinct story and setting like we have.
Can you talk about your community and like how they've been supportive the last couple of years and how you work with them to improve the game overall?
Yeah, so I mean that's one of the things that drew me in to even looking at Hunt in the first place was just the fact that it kept growing so steadily over its first 3 years. So I just started seeing the trailers and the promotions for it, started looking at some of the public data that's out there just about concurrent users and the player base. I'm like, wow, that thing is growing, and so that's the thing that caught my attention is it's growing year over year, month over month as it does the events. And then, the community is very passionate, very engaged. There's a lot of folks who've been with it from the very beginning. There's a lot of people who play it as their main and only game. And so they're deeply vested. We're all in the Reddits, we're all in the Twitches, we're all in all those different places interacting with fans and influencers and the creators there. And Hunt has a very devoted following with very strong feelings about what it should be and what it shouldn't be. And we listen to all of that as we make those decisions. I think the other part you get is the dev team, like, key people in the dev team, we throw hundreds of hours at this. Like, I have 1,500 hours in the game. That's more than any typical game I play recreationally. And then professionally, we're on it, we're playing it, we're out there in the community and seeing and experiencing all the things they're experiencing, good and bad. And so, very involved and very in touch. I guess that's how I describe this team relative to a lot of ones I've worked with.
What's the process like if the community starts to, be very passionate about like a monster being too hard to kill or a guns being not strong or too strong, and like to kind of walk us through that process of getting that feedback and implementing it into your game?
Yeah, so we look for both the qualitative data about the opinions and the sentiment and the trends, and then we'll talk amongst ourselves, and we also have to take into account the variety of skill levels that go into that and the play styles, because the top 6-star best shots in the world, high KDA players are going to have one opinion on how a thing goes, and it might be trivial or easy. Some of the lower MMR and lower KDA players are going to be like, well, this feels impossible. So trying to mitigate where everybody has a different shot at achieving or doing the different goals, whether they're against other players or against the monsters, is always a debate that starts with sentiment, but then we go to data. And so then we start looking at, what we have in the quantitative data from all the instrumentation to see, okay, well, how effective is this weapon actually? Like, how, what is its ratio for getting kills or getting killed? How many times does it show up in the loadout of a winning team? And we would, loosely look at like how many players were killed in the match by the other team, that team to the other teams, or what did they get out with bounties? So how successful were they in that? And so all those things for any piece of gear, any kind of monster that's encountered, we can compare it to all the other similar pieces in data and say, okay, does the data line up to the sentiment? When the data lines up to the sentiment, it's pretty easy to go make a change and make a tweak and adjust the cost or adjust the damage. When the two don't line up, then we have to have a lot of long debates about like, okay, why does the sentiment not match the data? Is the instrumentation need to be evaluated, or Do we have a vocal minority who are just really upset but aren't actually speaking to the broad experience? So a lot goes into it, and it's a big part of what we do.
You guys have all this data over at your studio about like the win-loss ratios, with the 2v2v2, the environments, gameplay. To talk a little about like how often do you see players that like what's the overall strat you see the most in your data, if you can talk about it? Is it just basically players skulking, killing other players? Is it players working together to kill the monster? Is it players that completely ignore the monster and other players and just focus on the environment?
Well, I guess, I mean, that's a loose thing. Like I was even going out on a limb there talking about trying to see what loadouts win, because winning is a thing we'll even argue about internally, right? Like, what's it mean to win hunt? Like, you can go in just saying, well, a win is only if I wipe the server and all the other hunters are dead before I leave. Someone else can be like, a win is just getting one kill in the game, because, there's moments where getting a single kill in hunt, to me, feels like winning a whole match of some other game. And then you'll have people who are like, no, it's all about the bounties. You want to get a bounty, you want to get it, and you want to get off the map as fast as you can to get the rewards of extracting at least one bounty. Other people will say, you're playing the game wrong. You need to fight for all the bounties on the map, and everyone should go to the gunfire, and everyone, it's just about how many other hunters you wipe out. So even that nebulous thing, we don't have that definition of this is what a win is. But what we can see is those different types of players and personas and how they engage with the different content. And so when we consider a new feature like the Stalker Beetle or other things that we've introduced, we'll be like, well, what does this mean to the players who play this way? And what is this going to mean to the players who play that way? And are we terribly disrupting, the motivations? And then we have enough representation of those play styles on the play team, on the dev team, that we can go in there. Then we also have influencers that we bring in, some of the partners from our Twitch partner Crytek program. We call it Night of the Hunter. We have a Discord with them. They can come in and participate and test before content releases sometimes, and we'll get a little extra feedback from those folks who have even more thousands of hours on the game than we do. And so all of that goes into then ultimately a couple folks having to make that creative decision for what are we going to try. But that's also the great thing about a service game is we can try a thing and then we can tune it and we can adapt and we can adjust based on what the results are that we're seeing.
I think just because I have to ask, because I think it's an interesting time to be in gaming, is it's 2023. Crossplay is now pretty much standard, like across all multiplayer platforms. Do you guys have any plans to support that in the future between console and PC?
We're having to step back and look at our whole console strategy and implementation and technology. So it's a thing that we consider. It's a thing I've done on other shooters at other places that I've been. So I get it there, but it's also not a simple thing to do to a game that's already been running for 5 years and was developed, PC-centric and ported to consoles. The controller inputs, of course, are like, the religious war that comes up whenever you start talking about crossplay or even different types of input within a single system. So all those have to be in consideration. We don't have it on our roadmap as a thing we're talking about releasing. But yeah, as a multiplayer game that exists across platform, crossplay and cross save are part of the discussions. It's just not currently part of the roadmap.
It's interesting because you guys use the Cry engine, and that's an engine that you don't see a lot. Like there's definitely games out there that use it, but like it's not as common as like Unreal or Unity, right? Or even Windows Game Maker or whatever. But like, are there any challenges when working with an engine like that that's not as widely known or worked with as like Unreal, for example?
Well, not for us because it's our engine. So that's also like the, to speak to CryEngine, like that's the history of the company. It's in the name Crytek, and that's what it, started up as doing that technology all the way back with Crysis and Far Cry back in the day. So, it is the engine it's built on, it's particularly good at doing these large, expansive environments and then populating all the foliage and the trees. So, it just really was. There's a lot about what Hunt is that came from like, what does CryEngine do well? That's what will make Hunt around, as I understand the history of this product coming together to be what it is. So it's also a thing, we'll be talking about in some of our roadmap stuff as we have coming up is what are we doing about updating the engine and taking that to newer versions? Because again, we had the game that's been operating for 5 years, so there is even newer versions of this to update as we want to look at new technologies and some new features.
Do you have any plans for new modes in the game currently in the works?
Yes, we have plans for new modes. We'll be looking at releasing a couple of those as we go across the year. Some of them have to do with training and just giving people a little more comfort getting familiar with the weapons or getting familiar with the modes and some of our core systems. And then experimental ones that we won't be talking about are in development. But again, that's a thing we have, a fair bit of experience with, is just trying it out. A lot of the ideas that seem like they'd be fun or that seem like a no-brainer, when you actually try to put them into the formula, are like, oh no, this is actually not peanut butter and chocolate. It's something else altogether. So we're always looking at it and experimenting and theorizing what they could be. Right now, there's a few around training and onboarding new players that we want to get in there. And then we'll be back to talk later in the year about potentially entire new modes that would let you play in a different way.
Do you plan going to other environments in the world? Right now we're in the deep south, but do you plan on going to like Europe or maybe even an urban kind of area in that same time period?
Yeah, the time period, that's kind of one of our parts of the narrative or the lore for us, is that these kind of incursions of this corrupting force can happen in shadowy corners of the world and not just the deep south. So those are discussions we're having. We are considering what we do. We have a new map in the works that we've talked about. We don't have a release date for it yet. And it's been in development and does include like a new biome and some new places to be that you would not see in the existing maps.
How has the new bug tool gone for you, for your team, for your development team?
Yeah, so it's gone well. And again, it's a thing that we released to try and mix up a little bit of the play. Originally, I had kind of a sense of trying to break up some of the stalemates of like, well, there's a group inside with shotguns and there's a group outside with sniper rifles. And both groups are accusing the other groups of being campers and nobody's moving. So this was just a little thing we were putting in to say, well, if we had kind of our version of a 1895 horror mechanic supernatural drone that can go in there and kind of scout it out or mix up the situation a little bit, what would that look like? And that's how we get the Stalker Beetle. And yeah, it's released without breaking the game, so we were happy about that because there was a lot of fear it would do that. And is a thing we'll keep tuning and adjusting as we go. But so far, didn't completely overwhelm any meta, didn't overwhelmingly change any of the play styles or patterns, so it was considered a success for us.
And then how does the team at Crytek feel about the new season pass like style of events?
The season pass, battle pass, and events has been very popular with fan base, very popular for us. We think, especially with the trilogy that we were just concluding there with the Trader's Moon and Serpent's Moon and Devil's Moon, where it's getting better with each one. Each one of those events set new records for us with attendance and engagement. So that felt like it's a good track. And then it gives us a good framework to know how much content we have to make, what it needs to do, and where it needs to go. So marching to that beat feels like a thing we want to keep doing as we go into the future.
And the last question I have is, what can we expect next from Hunt Showdown? Anything you can tell us what players can look forward to in the next coming months or this year even?
Things that were coming in the next coming months. So we learned a lot about the new experimental traits that we put out into Devil's Moon. Some of those will be coming back as regular traits that aren't going to be tied to the event, now that we have a sense of how they perform and what effect they had on gameplay. So you can expect new traits to become part of just the standard hunter makeup as opposed to just being in the events. And then again, like we just said with the event success of Devil's Moon, you can expect more things like it, where we mix up some of the core mechanics of the game. We mix up some of the hunter abilities. We introduce, like one of our things that we had going into that was like every one of these things that somebody would look at and be like, that's completely OP. And it'd be like, well, okay, that's a place to start. But then wound up not being completely OP. A few of them wound up being a lot stronger than the other ones. And so that's a thing we're learning from. But you can expect to see more risks and more experiments with a lot of those core mechanics that we'll do on just an event limited basis before we introduce it as a permanent part of the ecosystem.
Perfect. And then where can people go to find more information about Hunt Showdown? You get plug in your Discord, your Twitter, socials, website, all that good stuff.
Yep, we have a public-facing Hunt Showdown Discord. We love to have people in there. People are always finding games. You can even find people willing to teach you if you find the games difficult, or it plays better in a team. There's folks you can team up with there in that Discord. We have our Twitters. We have all of our Crytek partners that you can find on Twitch. They do a wonderful job as ambassadors for the game. I encourage everyone to go watch them play, ask questions. They are friendly and accepting and willing to teach and explain what's going on with Hunt and what makes it different. So I think all of those are great venues for people to go learn more about what's going on.